My name is Bernie Glover, and I am the support person here for chaplaincy. I sort of provide the substructure for what the chaplains do, and I also am the coordinator for the Loyola Chapel, which means that I take care of the management end of things, make sure it keeps running. Well, what happened from our side of things, the way it happened, the way it unfolded was we came in on a Tuesday following a holiday. In fact, yes, it was following a holiday. And we found that the chapel had been rearranged, I think is the best way to put it, because happily there was no damage done, but many items in the chapel had been precisely arranged in a particular way. The processional cross had been separated because it's a two-piece affair. The upper section had been left lying on the floor, face down. It had been covered with a prie-dieu, a kneeler, and then with one of the larger of the altar cloths. The altar stone and the Book of Remembrance had been removed from their special place in the altar. The altar stone had been placed on the upper portion of the prie-dieu. The Book of Remembrance was placed on a small table that we use for the rings during a wedding ceremony, and that table was placed in the middle of the chapel. The dust cover cloths for both the altar and the various tables throughout the chapel were arranged sort of linearly from just beyond the small table to heading towards the main front doors where the pulpit is. A statue of the Sacred Heart had been removed from a platform above the altar on one side, and was now standing in front of the altar, in front of the ambo rather, facing the altar. And the altar cloth from the altar over which the statue stood had been draped reverently over the shoulders and hands of the statue. The main altar cloth has gold crosses affixed with Velcro on all four sides. Two of these were placed on the hands by affixing them to this cloth that had been placed over them. A strip of wood that had been lying around the chapel as part of the molding had been placed in one of the hands like a staff. As well, the Paschal candle was removed from its stand. The 5 pins that are usually in the candle were removed, and the candle was placed in the baptismal font, which is just behind the pulpit, and ignited and left burning. 3 of the pins were in the water of the baptismal font. 2 more were on the floor. One of the holy water containers had been emptied and refilled with sand and placed on one side of the font. A piece of birch, which was left over from a funeral service a few weeks earlier, had been placed on the other side of the rim of the baptismal font. As well, 2 of the small boxes that we used to hold the brass candlesticks that we use for Mass had been placed in the middle of these dust covers, and inside each was a sweat sock. On top of them were 2 articles in 2 different publications, one on the Dalai Lama and his meeting with the Prime Minister when he was in Canada, the other simply on Buddhism in Tibet. As well, the contents of the first aid kit were arranged, sort of spread out along one side of these dust covers. In the middle of the altar, which had now, of course, been stripped, a potted plant was placed, surrounded by a number of small stones that we had used as part of our Easter celebrations, that had spent the summer sitting around the baptismal font, on the base of the baptismal font. Underneath the chapel was another of the dishes used for holy water at the doors, simply sitting there. Yet another of these was placed between the statue of the Sacred Heart and the various dust covers, and one of the crosses from the altar had been left in the water. Also, you left your keys behind, sitting on with the two publications on the boxes. As I said before, the precision of the arrangement was very high. It was as if great care was taken for each of the various steps, that there was meaning to each of the emplacements. Well, first to explain, the altar stone is exactly that, is a piece of stone in which are embedded what we call relics. Because this chapel was built by the Jesuit community, these are probably are relics from the Canadian martyrs, Isaac Jogues, Jean de Brebeuf, and their companions. And every altar has an altar stone. It is part of what we call the consecration process, when the altar is blessed for its service. The initial significance that we got was one of the things that struck me. One of the reasons why I knew that this was not a malicious act was that there was reverence in how things were arranged. That was a part of the precision. Like, for instance, although the altar stone was left perched on a prie-dieu, which is, of course, a little bit like, you have the stand, it's a little bit angled for people to kneel against and pray. The cloth was draped over it in such a way that it was meant to, you may not have known what it was, but you definitely understood that it was something to be revered, something to be treated with respect. Our initial conjecture when we looked at it, because a number of people were there, including our priest chaplain, our first thought was definitely that the person who had arranged them had meant to have a religious significance to it. We initially thought of two different possibilities: that it either was somebody with a mental disorder, or somebody with an artistic bent attempting to make an art project with a religious significance. What I further deduced when you came to see me and you told me sort of about your delusion at the time, it sort of made things a lot more significant. The idea, for instance, that the crucifix, which is, of course, a cross with the Christ figure on it, so the Christ crucified, was turned face down. Because obviously the risen Christ is not on the cross. The great reverence with which, the altar cloth from the small altar below the Blessed Sacrament, this was a cloth, incidentally, that was made for us in Central America. It was a gift from a Central American community with which we were associated for many years during the 60s and 70s. And it is a very colorful cloth. It is very beautiful. And the way it was arranged, again, was very reverential. So that this was definitely an act of reverence towards this statue, because among other things also, the statue of the Sacred Heart is a statue of the risen Christ. He stands with arms extended. He is risen. And so that this was definitely, sort of a mark that said, this is the way it is. This is to be respected. This is to be adored. The one thing we really didn't know what to make of was the first aid kit and the dust cloths in the middle of the chapel. Again, they were very precisely laid out, but in terms of religious significance, there was not a whole lot of meaning that we could really derive out of it, other than the two the two articles on Buddhism. One of them talked about how the Cardinal Archbishop of Ottawa had arranged for the meeting between the Dalai Lama and Prime Minister. Other things, such as the significance of the plant surrounded by stones, something I didn't know, but I was told by Father Garrity, was that this is a very Jewish symbol, and that I'm sure was probably purely an accident on your part. It looked very nice, but it just sort of happened that we had it out of the blue just happened to have a significance in terms simply of the fact that it was again another act of reverence, and so it then sort of lent itself to the whole idea that there was really an attempt to bring respect to, while it was working out of your own disability, your own illness, your intent was in fact not to disrespect the chapel, but to put it, I think maybe most plainly, you were praying in your own way.